Hello, how are you doing today? I have for you Law 6, Part 2 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. Now, Law 6 is court attention at all costs. Part 1, we looked at surrounding yourself, surrounding your name with the sensational and scandalous. And Part 2, we're going into creating an air of mystery. Now, we want to look at a quick judgment of this law. You want to be enigmatic, difficult to interpret. This is what will create an air of mystery, and furthermore, it'll help create a sense of anticipation in your audience, and that's what's going to get people interested in you. You don't want to show all of your cards. You don't want to be predictable. That's what's going to draw interest away from you. Now remember, to create an air of mystery, be enigmatic, don't be too predictable, do not show all your cards, and this should create an air of mystery for you. Let's go into an example. The people of Paris were absolutely struck by this exotic dancer. By all means, she appeared foreign. Her performance was Indian themed, so everybody thought she was from Indian descent. And she began performing for small and select groups in her colorful and jeweled dresses. This culture that was seen through exotic dance was very unfamiliar to the European people in 1905. And the performer went by the name Mata Hari. She began to gather so much attention that she began doing interviews. Mata Hari was doing interviews, and this is where her notoriety began to be questioned a little bit. People were interested, they wanted to know more, and she was walking the walk. It came time for her to talk the talk. Remember, this is Law 6, Court Attention at All Costs, Part 2, Create an Air of Mystery. And when Mata Hari had to start taking these interviews, you want to look back into Law 4. This is a principle that is very important. Always say less than necessary. Let's go into these interviews. During the interviews, Mata Hari began changing her origin story. The media didn't view this as a bad thing. She wasn't attacked. It actually created an air of mystery for Mata Hari. She was then in Europe viewed as a personifier of Indian poetry, mysticism, hypnotizing charm, and voluptuousness. All of her dancing and dress, it greatly impressed the high society in Paris. This led her to touring all across Europe, Berlin, Vienna, Milan, and eventually she had a fortune for herself and a new sense of independence. Now at this point, we want to look back into the law we're talking about. It's Law 6, Court Attention at All Costs, Part 2, Create an Air of Mystery. Now, eventually, after Mata Hari's travels, she was tried and convicted of espionage. It turns out she was a German spy with no descent. She was not a descendant of me Falling. Now this is when we recall the law we're talking about. That's Law 6, Courting Attention at All Costs, Part 2, Creating an Air of Mystery. And Mata Hari's dress and dance certainly did that to everyone in Europe. Now eventually, when the story gets interesting, is when she was arrested, she was tried, and she was convicted of being a German spy. She wasn't Indian, she wasn't Java. Mata Hari was no more. Her actual name was Margaret Zell, and she was a native of Friesland, Holland. She must have gathered some serious intelligence back in 1905 from the high society in Paris and across Europe. That's the background story of Margaret Zell's performance as Mata Hari. Now, let's actually look into an interpretation of what went on, how she created this air of mystery, and furthermore, why she wanted to court all that attention. And we're going to look back to 1904, a year before the act really took hold. Back in 1904, Margaret Zell was an immigrant in Paris. Much like many other young women, they relied on exotic dancing as a form of income. And she noticed that most of the time women would do this for a couple years and then be replaced by younger women. Zell wanted more. She didn't want to appear like your average exotic worker in Paris. So what did she do? She decided to draw inspiration from local dances that she actually viewed with her family during trips to Java and Sumatra. One thing that she knew from the start is that she didn't have to be the best dancer. She had to create an air of mystery. She had to change constantly. This was done through stories, dances, dresses, and this is how Mata Hari began to court all the attention. It set her apart. She wasn't your average exotic worker. Another thing to note is that she was no more attractive than your average woman that went to Paris to dance in 1904. Mystery that cannot be grasped invites constant interpretation by people, and that's what people want. That's what draws people in, allowing them to interpret something, anything. Let them interpret that mystery that you create. Now, let's take some time to look at the keys to power in regard to Law 6, Court Attention at All Costs. Part 2, Create an Air of Mystery. First key to power. In a seemingly bland world, always appear enigmatic, difficult to interpret. That'll interest people. A second key to power here is to remember that mystery invites interpretation, and that excites imaginations. People will find you intriguing, and they will want more. Third key to power is that reminding yourself how mystery can be subtle. Mystery can be you holding back. Look at Law 4, say less. Mystery can be an inconsistency with your actions and phrases. It's those inconsistencies and saying less that will arouse interpretation of you among your audience. Fourth key, make people figure you out. Just say you're at a party, look at your phone in the middle of a conversation and leave abruptly. People will be like, oh, what happened? Is he okay? Did something? Meanwhile, you just went back to your house to go to sleep. This fifth key is very important. You want to outmaneuver your predictable opponents. Employ a decoyed object that is relatively unexplainable or just simply not easy to interpret. This will unsettle your competition, and that's what they don't want. The last key I'm going to give here is don't compete with a king or queen. Now, that was Law 6, Court Attention at All Costs, Part 2, Create an Air of Mystery. Let's look at a reversal, the opposite. Now, between Part 1 and Part 2, we really went into some forms of adapting to a continually changing world, whether that's creating an air of mystery or associating your name with the sensational and scandalous. Those instances are very helpful, but they aren't always true to a situation. Notoriety isn't always good. If your notoriety offends those above you, then you will appear insecure and very desperate for attention. And again, that was Law 6, Court Attention at All Costs, Part 2, Create an Air of Mystery. We were able to delve into the story of Mata Hari, how she was actually an immigrant in Paris from Holland. She created an air of mystery by dressing in traditional Indian dresses and doing their dances across Europe, as back in 1905, Europeans were not familiar with Indian traditions, and this created an air of mystery around Mata Hari, which was strong enough for her to be a successful German spy up until she was caught. I'm sure she probably relayed some decent information from all of the high societies in Europe. I'm not saying to do that, but it's just an extreme example of how, when you court attention, you want to create an air of mystery, or even go back into part 2, like how P.T. Barnum would be scandalous in his letter mailing campaigns to drown his competition. He would be sensational with his bricklayer that attracted all sorts of attention to the American Museum. Courting attention is very, very important in the laws of power, and hope you were able to learn something. If not, I hope you were mildly entertained. Have yourself a phenomenal week, and see you later.